All right, so you know how sometimes you see two countries being all buddy-buddy for the cameras, big smiles, handshakes, the whole deal. But behind the scenes, it's like a whole different
Oh,
story.
yeah, absolutely. Like a political drama unfolding.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're diving into today, India and New Zealand. On the surface, things look pretty good, right? We just saw Prime Minister Modi of India
Hmm.
and Prime Minister Luxon of New Zealand, sharing a platform, talking about all this increased cooperation, making ties stronger, all that.
Yeah, it seemed very positive, at least from the headlines.
Right. But I don't know. I feel like there's something more here, something we're not quite seeing, something maybe a little uncomfortable.
Well, you're definitely on to something. See, while India and New Zealand usually work together on things like trade and education, this particular meeting had a bit of a different vibe. Prime Minister Modi brought up something that's been a bit of a sore spot for India, the Khalistan movement.
Okay, yeah, that definitely raises some eyebrows. So for those of us who might need a little refresher, what exactly is this Khalistan movement? And why is it such a big deal for India?
All right, so in a nutshell, the Khalistan movement is a Sikh separatist movement. They're advocating for an independent Sikh state. They want to call it Khalistan. And it would be carved out of the Punjab region, which, as you know, is currently part of India. This movement's been around for decades, actually. Things got really intense back in the 80s with a lot of violence. For India, this is about national security, keeping the country whole, that sort of thing.
Right, territorial integrity, all that. So it sounds like India is concerned about this movement, especially any activity happening in New Zealand. And some of the language being used in the reports, I've seen stuff like anti-India elements and abuse of freedom of speech. It's pretty strong.
It is. It's definitely a way for India to express concern without directly pointing fingers at New Zealand, saying they're harboring these groups. And honestly, I think India's sudden focus on the Khalistan movement with New Zealand might be tied to bigger changes happening in the world. Think about China and how their influence is growing in the Pacific. India might see this as a way to get closer to countries like New Zealand, strengthening those bonds, especially when everyone's dealing with this shifting power dynamic.
That makes a lot of sense. And speaking of getting closer, we got to talk about this defense and security pact they signed during the meeting. This seems like it goes way beyond your typical trade and education agreements, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. This isn't just some symbolic handshake. We're talking intelligence sharing, potentially even joint military exercises. It's a pretty big deal.
It definitely sounds like it. I mean, what are the real implications of this? And how does this pact fit into everything else we've been talking about?
Well, for starters, it really signals a potential shift in New Zealand's alliances, and that can have huge consequences for how power plays out in the region.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. Something else that caught my attention was Prime Minister Modi bringing up terrorist attacks, and not just any attacks. He specifically mentioned the Christchurch mosque shootings alongside the 26/11 attacks in Mumbai. Those were both absolutely horrific events, right? Christchurch in 2019 with white supremacists targeting the mosques, and then Mumbai in 2008 with those coordinated shootings and bombings.
Hmm.
By bringing those two tragedies up together, what do you think Modi's trying to do? Create a shared sense of, I don't know, suffering? Or is there a more printed message there?
I think it's a little bit of both. By acknowledging the pain both countries have experienced, he's creating a sense of solidarity. But he's also making a statement. He's saying that India sees this Khalistan issue as a form of terrorism that needs a global response.
Mm,
The same way the world came together after Christchurch to fight extremism,
yeah.
he's drawing a parallel there.
So we've got these official statements, all this talk about deepening ties, and yet we've also got this clear message about India's concerns over the Khalistan movement. What's the bottom line here? What's really going on beneath the surface?
Well, from where I'm sitting, India is drawing a line in the sand. They're saying that this Khalistan issue is non-negotiable, and they expect their partners to treat it seriously. For New Zealand, this is a bit of a tightrope walk. They want to keep things good with India, but they also have to manage things at home, protect freedom of speech, deal with their own concerns. This meeting, it wasn't just a friendly chat. It was a strategic conversation. We saw some underlying tension and possibly even a shift in the relationship between these two countries.
It really is fascinating, isn't it? You've got these smiles, the handshakes, but behind it all, you've got geopolitics, security worries, domestic pressure. It shows you that international relations are never simple. So what does this all mean for the future of India and New Zealand? Are we looking at a deeper partnership here, or is this going to be a source of friction? It's something to think about for sure. We'll have to see how things play out, but this definitely gives us a lot to consider.
Absolutely. It's a developing situation worth watching.
Definitely. All right, well, that's our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Always interesting to unpack these complex issues.